Object arrays allow us to work with multiple controls in a repetition to do some processing. In this example, we have a checkerboard or chessboard, and we can change the colors of the light squares using a color dialog, or the dark squares using the same color dialog. And in fact, the white and black that you saw originally was also done using processing of an object array. So let me show you how I did this. Here's my interface. Basically everything you see here is a label, and I have two buttons. And the buttons are named BTN Change Light and BTN Change Dark. So each of the numbers here showing the rows or the columns are labels. Now, as I've mentioned several times, I don't bother to rename labels I'm not going to refer to in code. So none of those are named. They're just the default. You can see here label 93. This one up here is going to be label 1. But the squares themselves I did name. And so they're named LBL and then the intersection of the row and column. So this is LBL A8. This is LBL D6, LBL H1, LBL A1. And I'm going to use those names to my advantage in coding our object arrays of all these labels. So let's take a look at the code. Now I want the object arrays to be class levels so I can use them in multiple routines. So I've created two class level arrays of type label. So these are label arrays, and they each hold 32 values from 0 to 31 index numbers. And I named them light squares and dark squares. But I can't populate these arrays because at this point those labels don't exist. The form has not yet been created. But I can create the arrays as placeholders, but then once the form is loaded, I need to load all of my labels that I want to be the light squares into the light squares label array, and the same with the dark squares. I also created an instance of color, which is class level, named light color. I set it to white. And I created another one called dark color and set it to black. That's going to be my original white and black when we start up. So there's a couple ways we can do this. I created a form load. And in that form load, I created another label array called temp light. And I simply populated it with the 32 labels that represent the white squares. I did the same thing with another local label array called temp dark, and I populated that with the dark square labels. Then I used a fixed iterative loop to go through those 32 instances from 0 to 31, and I simply set each element of the light squares array, which is my class level, to the temporary or local temp light array. And I did it for both light and dark squares. That populates these two arrays at the class level. Then I called a routine called color the squares. Here is that routine. So I have a private void color squares. I'm not passing it any parameters. I use a for each loop to iterate through each element of light squares. So label square in light square. So square is each iteration. And then I set the back colors of square to light color, which to start off with is white. But as I change colors, it might become a different color because I'm going to use this routine multiple times. Then I have a for each going through the dark squares, iterating through each one of those, setting each one to a label named square, which is a reference value to each label in my interface, and I'm setting the back color to wherever the dark color is. That creates the black and white template. Now when we click the two buttons, the BTN Change Light, I'm simply setting the color dialog 1, that's the color dialog down here in my interface. I just simply dragged the color dialog from the library to my project and put it down here on the system tray. I kept the name color dialog 1. So I'm setting the color of that to whatever the light color is. That's going to be my starting color. Then I'm going to show that dialog, and as the user changes colors or selects a color, once they close that, I'm going to set the light color to whatever color they've chosen. And then I simply call color squares again. And then do the same thing for the change dark button. So I'm going to use the same color dialog. I'm going to set the color this time to the dark color, and then show the color dialog. Once they've made a selection and close that dialog, dark color becomes whatever they've selected in the dialog, and I call color squares again. Okay. So the key really is in populating the class level arrays and doing that once the form has loaded, using a temporary array, populating that, and then copying those instances over to light squares. Now I could have, of course, said light squares sub 0 equals LBL A1 and light squares sub 1 equals LBL 3 and so forth. And I would end up with 64 lines of code here instead of this much smaller amount. And this works great for 64 squares. What if we had, let's say, 1,000 squares? We had a 10 by 10 checkerboard. And putting in 1,000 of these elements into the local arrays, chances are I might make a mistake somewhere along the way in the copy and paste of that or typing of that. So I'm going to show you another way this could be done. So as an alternative, and I'm just going to get rid of my comments here so you can see this. We'll actually run it. So I'm going to uncomment the selection. And let me also do the color squares call out here. And then I'll simply take all of this and we'll comment this out. All right, so here's the alternative. I created two integer variables called light index and dark index. I'm going to keep track of my index numbers as I'm building this out. Then I used a for each loop to go through all of the controls in my form. And I'm calling each iterance of those XYZ. Now I only want to work with labels that are named starting with LBL. Those are the labels that I named. All the other labels are named label 1, label 2, label 3, label 93. So I want to use anything that starts with LBL as the name. And so I'm using xyz.name, the substring, and I'm starting with character 0 and getting 3 characters, checking to see if that's LBL. Now again, XYZ is simply a reference to each of the labels or each of the controls in my form. So if it is named starting with LBL, then I'm going to get the fourth letter, which is letter number 3, using a character array of the name. And that's going to give me the A through H. And then the row is going to give me, I'm going to use substring on that one because I want to take a character. I'm going to take character 4, just one character at a time. That's going to be the 5th character. That's going to be a string, but I'm going to use int.parse to convert that into an integer. So row is going to be the value 1 through 8. Then I used a switch. And I did a switch on the column. So case A, C, E, and G. If my label, my first one says named LBL-A1, is going to hit this case. And we'll see what the row number is. So if the row is 1, row modulus 2 is going to equal 1, not 0. So it's going to skip this and go to the else. And I'm going to add this XYZ treated as a label to my light squares array at the integer of light index. That's going to be the index number of the element. And I'm going to increment light index. The next one, which says A2, going to come back through the switch again, and now the case A, but 2 divided by 2 has a remainder of 0, and now I'm going to specify that one, LBL-A2, as being a dark square and increment the dark index. This works great for 64 labels. It would work for 1,000 labels. If it's not column A, C, E, or G, then it's going to be column B, D, F, and H. So there's my default. And all I did is I swapped the light squares and dark squares. Since it's going to be, each row is going to be opposite of the row above it or below it. And here, rather than having the modulus equaling 0, I said it's not equal 0. So that'll give me the odd rows of 1, 3, 5, and 7, whereas up here we're getting the even rows of 2, 4, 6, and 8. So that's just a quick little simple iteration through all of the labels in my interface named LBL something something. And then I call color squares. So I'll show you that this works. I'm going to run this. And you can see here I get my black and white squares. And of course I can change those colors. And we can even define any custom color we want here. Maybe I want a really light cyan. I can click OK, or I can add that to the custom colors. I'm going to say OK, and there's my light cyan. So those all work. Once again, I'm going to comment all of this out. I'm going to go to the Edit menu, choose Advanced, Comment Selection, and this one I'm going to uncomment. And let me test this so you can see that this works as well. So there's my black squares, change the light squares. And so both of those work. One little thing here in terms of doing the labels in the array. Formatting it this way with basically 2 rows of labels as far as the light and dark together on each statement line makes it really easy to copy and paste, and then all I have to do is change the A's to C's and the B's to D's and so forth. It helps reduce the amount of errors if you, rather than just putting this all in one line. The chance of making a typographical error or a copy and paste error becomes much higher in that case. This I can very easily just scan these and go, okay, ACEG, 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 BDFH, and so forth, and I can go 1, 3, 5, 7. And I can verify that there doesn't seem any mistakes there. And then of course running it does verify that everything is working. So that's how I use object arrays to do some processing. You're going to see this come up again in a future assignment as you go on to the Advanced C# class, CIS 262 AD. In fact, the very first assignment in that class is sort of a review of stuff you've learned in this course in terms of beginning C#, CIS 162 AD. And in that assignment, you are going to create this project for airline seating. We're going to retrieve the seating from a text file, find our seating.txt, open that up, and we're going to populate an array in terms of who is sitting in what seat. And then you're going to use that array in coloring the different seat assignments, whether they are occupied or not. So red means it's occupied, green means it's empty. And notice there are tooltips coming up with each one of these. Those tooltips are also populated using an object array of these labels. And then if we add a passenger, I'm just going to add myself in here. And I click on a seat. Let's say I want 5D. It assigns me to that seat. Notice it turns it red. If we remove a passenger, let's get rid of Charles Lindbergh in 5B. I'm going to check remove passenger and click 5B. And I get a verification that I really want to remove him. I'm going to say OK. So we want to keep this updated. Every time we make changes in that assignment, it's going to rewrite that text file. So if I were to close this, remember we got rid of Charles Lindbergh and I'm in seat 5D. As I close this, and then I'm going to run it again, I'm going to retrieve my seating, bring up the same file, and notice Charles Lindbergh is no longer in 5B, it's an empty seat, and I am in 5D. So the text file, every time I make changes to any of the seat assignments, the text file is rewritten back out. You just want to keep track of that text file when you open it and use that then to write back out to it. So in the advanced course, when you get to this assignment, you'll want to come back probably and watch this video again. Just remember that it's here.